Hello everyone and welcome to the National Army Museum for this week's Friday Insight. Here at the museum we tell the story of the British Army from the Civil Wars to the modern day. Through our galleries, collections, programmes and research, there are many ways you can support the museum. You can buy a book in our shop, visit the cafe, donate or become a member where you get your exclusive events and discounts in return. Today I am delighted to welcome Julian Farrance from the dizzying heights of upstairs. He is the head of the Regimental Museums and International Partnerships at the National Army Museum and an expert in uniform dress of the British Army. He has worked in the museum for 25 years, wearing several different hats in the course of his career. In March 2024, the British Army made the bold decision to allow soldiers and officers to grow beards, supposedly breaking centuries of military tradition. Today, Julian will explore the history of the British Army through the fascinating lens of facial hair. There will be time for questions at the end of the discussion for both our online and in-person audiences. For online audience, you can post questions in the Q&A chat bar, and these will be put to the speaker at the end. Moving on to some technical points, should we encounter any technical issues, please bear with us whilst we work to rectify them. If your stream freezes, we suggest that you click the refresh button. A member of the team will always be active in the chat. With all that said, I'll now pass over to Julian. I hope you'll enjoy the talk. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you very much. Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the National Army Museum. It's nice to see so many moustaches here today. I think that's a good start. As Tom has said, I have been working here since 2000. I once said that to a group in India, and they said, Julian has been working at the National Army Museum for 2,000 years. And although it does feel like it sometimes, that's not actually the case. But that's why I'm today talking about facial hair in the British Army. Now, to be fair, we've got you here slightly under false pretenses because if we limit ourselves exclusively to facial hair, this is going to be a pretty short talk. So what I'm going to do is expand it a little bit and talk about hairstylings in the British Army as well. We'll also talk about how these kind of things can be used in genealogical research. You will find, if you do that, and I suspect looking at our audience, you might be interested in that kind of thing, that the way that British soldiers look throughout our period is something that's incredibly useful to you. Now, again, looking at the audience and knowing some of the people in the audience, when the regulation was changed last year now, in March of last year, to say that beards could be grown within the British Army, I suspect there might have been a bit of grumbling. Not my army, you wouldn't have seen that in my day, that kind of thing. And that is not a unique position. I'm pretty sure that when the Enfield rifle was introduced to the British Army in 1853, there were plenty of soldiers going, this is rubbish. Give me my old brown bess, I'll be a lot happier. But actually, the idea that British soldiers have worn beards is not a new one. If we go back even further than you might suspect to, say, for instance, what we now call the British Civil Wars, but at the time called the English Civil Wars, beards was not a particularly unusual thought. Now, in fact, this conflict is so located towards hairstylings that the nickname of one of the forces, as we all know, is to do with that. So, what am I talking about here? What's the nickname of parliamentary soldiers? Somebody tell me. Roundheads, exactly so. And if you ask people why are parliamentary soldiers referred to as Roundheads, some of them might say to you, well, it's because they wore round helmets. Well, okay, so parliamentary soldiers are wearing round helmets. What are royalist soldiers wearing? Big floppy hats with feathers on. Well, if you're on a battlefield and some idiot is going to come and try and brain you with a broadsword, what would you rather have on your head? A large iron pot helm or a big floppy hat with feathers in? So actually, the idea that people are wearing helmets is universal. This does actually link to hairstyles. But wait, you might legitimately say, look, if we look at King Charlie over there, nicely long dressed hair, beard. Here's old Noel, nicely long hair and beard. Well, he's going to have something that covers up all the warts, I suppose. So where does this nickname of Roundheads come from? Anyone got any ideas? I'm not doing all the work, by the way. Any ideas at all? It becomes about religion. It initially comes from a different thing. So Roundheads is to do with short hair. So who in the parliamentary army has short hair? Well, actually, a body of apprentices attach themselves to the parliamentary corps. And as part of their letters of apprenticeship, they have to keep their hair clipped short. So that is why these large body of apprentices who attach themselves to the parliamentary force become known as Roundheads. In fact, it's an insult. The royalist soldiers are all going, Roundheads, because they're basically saying to the royalists, you're a bunch of kids. So this is where that initially comes from. Now, later on, as we know, the parliamentary army does become somewhat radicalized, and that short hair and shaven faces becomes identified with those radical soldiers. So English Civil War, score one for the shaven side. So we've got more about the hairies as we go a little further forward. So if we look further into the century, into the 17th century, we go to the 1670s, 1680s. The English armies are still fighting against our traditional foes. Who in 1689 is the traditional foe of the English army? The French? Not yet. Scots, exactly so. Exactly so. We're fighting against the Scots. Famously, in the 1680s, we're fighting against the Scots, and there's a particular battle in 1689, the Battle of Killiecrankie. Famous not only for the fact that British soldiers have shaven, but also for the advent of a new wonder weapon. A new weapon is being developed and used at the Battle of Killiecrankie. Looking back at the English Civil War for a brief moment, we have our army split into divisions. We have what we now call the infantry, the artillery, and the cavalry, but that's a bit Frenchified at the time. Infanterie, artillerie, cavalry. So at the time, we were referring to it as horse, foot, and guns. Now, the foot is what we now call the infantry. The foot soldiers are divided. So roughly half of our soldiers are what are called shot or muskets, half are pike. So the bulk of our soldiers doing the damage is actually the muskets, the guys with the weapon, with the muskets. The pikes are mainly used in a defensive formation. Occasionally they'll get to push a pike. More regularly, they're being used offensively. And that's a bit of a waste of resource, really, if you're mainly using half your infantry soldiers to fight defensively. So we need a way of making our muskets spiky. How can we do that? Bayonets, exactly so. So bayonets, we believe invented in the town of Bayonne, are initially used at the Battle of Killiecrankie. And the first production model bayonet is what's called a plug bayonet. It's a big knife that you ram into the end of the musket. Anyone visualize any potential problems with ramming a big knife into the end of your musket? You can't, exactly. You can't fire your shot. So what the English are expecting at the Battle of Killiecrankie is that our hairy Highland brethren will come descending off of the mountainsides in a great Highland rush with claymores and battle axes, and we'll be standing ready with our new wonder weapon. So as the Scottish army advances, the English fire their last volley. The order comes, screw in your daggers. So they do, and they stand ready to receive the charge. But unfortunately for them, the hairies do not charge home. They stop, they giggle a bit, they draw pistols and carbines, and they shoot the crap out of the English line. Oh no! Unfixed. Well, that's the point when the charge comes forward, and so it's score one for the hairies at that point. If you look at the charge of Lochiel, you'll see a lot of beards in the Highland army. It doesn't actually detract from the fashion, and I'll mention that fashion is a thing that's going to be very important as we go forward. Military and civilian fashions will constantly bounce back and forward, aping each other. And you can see here that now this clean-shaven look is definitely the way forward. There are excuses or reasons put forward for that. The army will say at this time, beards must be shaved because they are potentially a place for vermin. You will get lice and you will get nits and things like that in your beard. I'm pretty much convinced it's because the fashion of the day is for clean-shaven, and that they're just providing reasons for why. You'll also see that this gentleman has a very long head of hair. He may have been blessed with that very long head of hair. He may have had to actually resort to artificial means of giving himself this fantastic look. Some of us are a little more follically challenged will be happy to hear that there were wigs available for soldiers as we go forward. So, creeping forward a little further. Oh. Tech! Oh, there we go. It's all right. It's worked. We can see here that now definitely no beards visible here, but certainly longer hair is the thing. And longer hair is going to maintain the thing. Officers will dress their hair. Officers might wear wigs if they are, famously one officer lifts his hat and has his tie wig tied to his hat, takes the whole lot off in one big go. Not a brilliantly inspiring look. Other rank soldiers might wear wigs. It's pretty unlikely. Peasant wigs at the time were designed to be not particularly attractive. So in a lot of cases, soldiers will dress their own hair. And they may go in for things like clubs and queues. Have you heard of that? A queue is essentially a ponytail, usually greased to be able to hold it into place. You wipe all your hair back into a tie. Queues not particularly popular, certainly not with people who have to keep their collar clean. You will get mess from that. So clubbing your hair is a way where you will fold your ponytail in and then tie it in a ribbon. So a lot of soldiers of the 18th century will tie their hair in that way, and you can see I'm having to click twice here. There we go. But this is the Mulburian period. Interestingly here, by the way, you've got the way that soldiers are being identified. So we were trying to make our soldiers look uniform, except down here where we have the musicians. So there becomes, the way that you will identify soldiers on the battlefield is you look at their uniform and look at the facing colours. The facings are the coloured pieces on the uniform, on the cuffs, or on the breast. The musicians at this time are designed in such a way that they reverse the facing colours. So this is a regiment with a red coat, obviously, with yellow facings. The musicians are in yellow coats with red facings. That's initially to try and say to the enemy, musicians, non-combatants, don't shoot them. Unfortunately, musicians actually have a really useful... What do musicians do on battlefields? They do, certainly. You can play a drum and inspire somebody. More important than that? Stretcher bearers, they can, certainly bandsmen later on will become stretcher bearers. Signals, exactly. You have no battlefield radio at Blenheim, so you're using your musicians to play bugle calls or trumpet calls or beat drum calls to be able to move your army around. So they are a legitimate target. And if you've put them in a different color uniform, you're kind of marking them out, really. So that is something that will fall by the by. But you can see in my picture here, these soldiers have all got what's called clubbed hair. So they have got their hair folded back under and ribboned back in place. And that's going to be something that sticks with us. Now, as we go through the century, fashions will change and white hair becomes elegant. Most soldiers are not going to have white hair, so how can we do this? We will powder our hair. So there becomes allowances made for powdering of hair. Again, keeping that clean is quite tricky. Famously, I say famously, you might not have heard of this story, but powdering your hair can sometimes be problematic. There is a story of an officer with powdered hair who is playing cards with his colleagues, and when he leans in to scoop his winnings off the table, his head comes in contact with the candle and it explodes, killing all of the players. This is quite a remarkable event, so it has to be checked, and they discover that his soldier lackey, who had been powdering his hair, had run out of hair powder, and so had powdered his head with white gunpowder. Now, I will not say that this is the reason that the army abandons the idea of powdering hair, but not long after that, this does actually come to be the case. If we look at soldiers here during the Revolutionary War, this is the admirable Lieutenant Colonel Bannister Tarleton. You can see that by this point, in the later part of the century, we're starting to get our hair cut a little more closely. And again, it's on campaign soldiers tend to do things a little differently. They'll wear more comfortable uniforms. And if you're trying to powder hair and keep it tied, it can be a bit of a pain. So again, cutting hair will become more predominant on the battlefields. And again, as we get later into the century, it will begin to really change. Well, that's for the English. This is actually an English cavalry soldier, but you can see he's quite mustachioed. If you go into the late 18th century and early 19th century, aside from the fact with hair greased so tightly back that you can find actually some soldiers can't close their eyes, that becomes problematic as well, and is the forerunner of the Croydon hair lift, or facelift rather. But in the English forces, we have got some soldiers with moustaches in the cavalry. The French army at this time, by the time you've got into the imperial period of the French army, in the turn of the century from 18th into 19th, their light cavalry are braiding their hair, so they've got a ponytail at the back and two pigtails at the front, even going so far as to braid musket balls into the lower extremities of the hair to keep it weighted down. I've always been a bit surprised about that, because you would think, wouldn't you, if you're galloping around, these are going to be whizzing around, you're definitely going to get one in the eye at some point. But it is actually the case. So again, at this point throughout our position, we've got British cavalry with moustaches. Mainly our infantry are going clean-shaven, although side whiskers are starting to come in. But of course, if we go forward a little further, that's quite an interesting thing from our collection here with Wellington's shaving mirror and some of the razors available. I was going to jump forward to this, which is our opponent. So not all French soldiers, but certainly the Imperial Guard are advancing with the moustaches whiffling in the wind. So at Waterloo in 1815, we have the situation where the Imperial Guard are thrown in for the last time. When we know in Waterloo, the French infantry attack in one particular formation. They attack in vast columns. So you have these enormous columns, many hundreds of soldiers wide, many thousands of soldiers deep, and they'll come rolling across the battlefield with the eagles flying and the drums beating the pas de charge and all the soldiers screaming "Vive l'Empereur!" and presumably, if you're the Imperial Guard, with your moustaches waving in the breeze, which is a very awe-inspiring look. And generally speaking, if you are opposed to that, a lot of European soldiers, Portuguese soldiers, Spanish soldiers, Prussian soldiers might look at that and go, you know what, something better to do somewhere else. And a lot of that is to do with display. The reason that soldiers in this period are wearing the tall hats, they're wearing the broad shoulders, is to try and convince the enemy, I don't want to mess with you, I'm going to leave. And I suspect the moustaches have something to do with that as well. Very manly, obviously. But these formations, these columns, as they advance, although they look incredibly impressive, and if they get into contact with your formation, they'll batter you out of the way, how many muskets can they fire? One each? No, because you can't fire through your mates. If you're standing at the back of the column, you'll kill somebody on your side. Just the front rank. So what does the front rank have to do if they're going to fire their muskets in 1815? Potentially, what else? Can you move and fire at this time? You've got to stop. So if you stop, what does the rest of the column do? It either stops or it flattens you. So despite the fact that these soldiers look incredibly impressive, and if they get into contact with you, are incredibly impressive, as they approach, they have no teeth. So if you're standing in two long, thin, fragile-looking redcoat lines, how many muskets can you fire? You can fire all of them, and you will volley fire by company, usually out of sequence. You're not going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 5, 15, 25, 35, 50, up and down, up and down, up and down. Constant ripple of fire up and down the whole length of the front line, and you will shred the heads of the incoming columns. And that's exactly what happens at Waterloo. The head of the Imperial Guard columns are shredded, and they go backwards for the first time. The unbeatable, invincible, immortal Imperial Guard go backwards, and when they go backwards, the entire French army goes backwards with them. Score 2 for the shaven side. Also famously at this point, by the way, as the guards, British guards advance, they're snatching those bearskins off of the deck as war trophies. Those are going to be coming back into our story a little later. So here we are. Now, these look like Napoleonic soldiers. They're not. What's the most obvious giveaway here to tell me that these are not, in fact, Napoleonic soldiers? It's a photograph. Thank you. Well done. Exactly. Well done, Wilson. Glad you spotted that one. Exactly. So this is actually a photograph of British soldiers in the 1850s during the time of the Crimean War. The uniforms are not particularly different. If you look, they're still wearing their coatees, they're still wearing cross belts. Wait a moment, though, there are some pretty impressive face furniture on display. So fashion has moved on. Now, by the time of the 1850s, it's still regulation to say that British infantry soldiers should not be wearing beards. In fact, the regulations state that you can have side whiskers, you can have moustaches. There must be at least an inch in between the end of your moustache and the beginning of your side whisker. Your chin must be clear, and it can extend no more than an inch under the jawline. But you will say, wait a moment, look at this fellow here with the marvelous whiskers. Well, this is because during the Crimean War, the army cannot get enough cordwood together to heat water to feed the soldiers. So sparing enough to shave with is completely out of court. So you will definitely get situations on the Crimean sieges, in the Crimean Peninsula outside Sevastopol, where soldiers are growing full beards. And in fact, magnificent beards. Beards you could hide a badger in. We look at this fellow here. This is a soldier of the Guards. Over on that side, that's a study from the Roll Call, which is a famous painting about the Battle of Inkerman. These are from a series of paintings, or photographs rather, called Crimean Heroes, and these are fellows who have recently returned. We know this is post-Crimean War because they have the new tunics, the new 1857 pattern double-breasted tunics. Again, if you're doing family history, genealogy, and you see soldiers wearing that double-breasted tunic, you can easily date them to 1857. Marvelously, these chaps here, the Crimean Heroes, were observed by Queen Victoria. She saw this series of photographs, and Queen Victoria, rather taken with the whisker, said, oh, look, these chaps, really very manly. I'd love to meet them. Bring him over from Combermere. Of course, if you're a soldier and you're told that you're going to go and meet the Queen, what's the first thing you do? Razors out. Whoosh, off they came. So apparently she was very disappointed. Terrible, but there we are. So as I say, this is currently still beyond regulation. They shouldn't really look like that, despite the fact that they look marvellous. Now, our cavalry, of course, also famously still wearing the side whisker. This is the Earl of Cardigan. A famous literary hussar refers to his side whiskers as tart catchers. I've never really understood that. How your side whiskers are going to capture pastry, I've never really got. Well, let's leave that beside. But obviously the idea that manly beauty is tied up in the side whisker is in some way predominant. So here the Earl of Cardigan, with his fabulous side whiskers, you could draw these out to about a foot in length on either side of his face. And here a couple more of our Crimean heroes, both infantry and cavalry, unfortunately not to last very much longer than this. Now again, we're still in just post-1857 now. I can tell this. Why? Well, I know that this is a Crimean soldier. Look at his Crimean medal. You can easily identify the Crimean medal. If, by the way, you happen to be looking at photographs, black and white photographs, and saying, well, I can't tell the rather bilious turquoise and yellow color of the Crimean medal, it's really easy to identify it because what that bar across it that was called the suspender is actually a weird shape. Crimean medals have a thing that looks like the thing you used to put around a whiskey decanter? It has one of that. We never do that again. So it's pretty unique, and you should be able to then even identify it in a black and white photograph. I know that it's a little post because, again, our soldier has gone into now a single-breasted tunic. Double-breasted tunics are smart as paint. Why do we think they abandoned the double-breasted tunic within a year? Yes, it's too expensive. Double row of brass buttons, very pricey. So as with a lot of reasons, economy is going to be part of the reason that it goes. Again, we can read the facings. We can see the shako there is the Albert II pattern, which again dates it. But again, looking at the face furniture, and this guy now is down to the full regulation. Side whiskers okay, chin is cleared, gap between the moustaches and the side whiskers. So we are moving into the 1860s and 70s, and this is going to be the predominant fashion. And as I say, the fashion is going to bounce backwards and forwards between military and civilian. Now, this is a little later in our period, and part of the way you can tell that is, look at the moustaches. Phenomenal. Some of these are marvelous. They're about an inch beyond the lower lip. Very impressive. Side whiskers have all gone. So this is actually post-1870s. Now, again, how I can date that is partially by the uniforms being worn, particularly the headwear. So if we look at the headwear here, these rather marvelous home service pattern helmets. Well, up until this point, most of our soldiers have been wearing what's called a shako, which is a very tall cap. And again, I mentioned earlier, moustaches, tall caps, broad shoulders, all about display. Look at me, I'm very big, you don't want to mess with me. Well, partially the reason we go into shakos is the most successful soldiers on the block when we adopt the shako are the French army, and they wear the big caps, so we go with that. Well, in the 1870s, what's happened to the French army? It has, exactly so, Frank. It has, as you correctly say, been whacked up by the Prussians. And what are the Prussians wearing? Spiky helmets. So successful soldiers wear spiky helmets, so from that point on, we're in spiky helmets. The Queen doesn't like them. She said they look far too much like policemen's helmets. But interestingly, despite the fact that she doesn't like the helmets, what she does like are the Glengarrys. So you'll see a number of soldiers here wearing side caps, but a number are wearing Glengarrys. Does that mean that these are Highland soldiers? No, it does not, because the Queen, being the Queen, is obsessed with anything north of the border. So Glengarrys for the entire army at this point. When do we think that goes out? 1901, when Her Majesty passes on. Glengarrys go back to just being a Scottish article of headwear. So again, useful stuff that you can see. But as I say, 1870s going into 1880s, these moustaches really easily spotted. Note how many you've got there. Can you see even, there is one guy over there who's got a clean upper lip. So the fashion of this day is to say, you must be wearing your moustache. In fact, here we go. So these are soldiers on foreign service. Have a guess as to where that might be. Close? India, exactly. Well, I say close, it's not that close at all, really. It's quite a long way apart. But it's actually up on the northwest frontier. Again, you look at that and go, well, how can you tell that? When you've been looking at these photographs for a long time, you will begin to sort of pick up that you can tell that. There are other interesting things. So not only the hairiness of the chin or the upper lip here, but the hairiness of the sporrans. So we can see that this is a Highland regiment. And if you really know your stuff, you can count the number of tassels on the sporran, and that will tell you which regiment you're looking at. So that one has got 5, and therefore I can deduce that these are soldiers of the Black Watch. Now, also interestingly, the other things that are changing around this period. Facial hair, certainly, but what is notable about that image as far as uniform is concerned? Pith helmets, yes, we've got helmets from foreign service helmets. What colour coat are those soldiers wearing? Khaki. But how could you tell that? That's a black and white photograph. You can see immediately, can't you, that they're wearing khaki uniforms. So that's coming in this period, in the 1870s, partially because the weapons are changing. It's not that a British general woke up one morning going, green! No, it is because the weaponry has changed to the extent that we are using smokeless powders. If you look at this period this, where our soldiers are all wearing red coats, every weapon discharge is going to push out a massive cloud of black powder smoke. And there's no point in trying to use your terrain to hide your soldiers. If you go and get a rifleman and stick him behind a tree and say, you go in over there, Charlie, as soon as he fires the rifle, woof, big cloud of smoke, there he is! There is no point. So in these vast clouds of smoke, your commanders need to be able to go, red, 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 mine, blue, get them. By the time you get into the 1880s, you're getting smokeless powders coming in, small puff of smoke, you can now put your soldiers into the terrain. So immediately that this is available, British soldiers will go into khaki-coloured uniforms, German soldiers will go into field grey-coloured uniforms, and French soldiers will stay in bright blue with scarlet trousers. The élan of the soldier. However, by the first Christmas of the First World War, the French army's lost over 250,000 guys killed, and they very rapidly redeploy into horizon blue. Camouflage is fantastically important if you can use it. But as I say, again, looking at the kind of face fungus that's on display here, this chap has got a marvellous set of chin whiskers there as well. Unusual, but still got away with it. Now, this is the 1890s in that picture over there. Again, I'm picking up on some genealogical aspects here. Do you think you could identify what colour that uniform is? Yeah, green, exactly. Well done. Because the one thing that you can tell is when you look at the earlier images is that the tunic and the trousers are different colours. When you're looking at that one, they're the same. So that is in a one block colour. And almost certainly, though those are soldiers of the Rifle Brigade, so they're in green uniforms, the lambswool cap certainly tells you that as well. And now we've got a 50-50 split on moustaches and clean lips. This one, more likely to be Edwardian. I mean, the look of little Lord Fauntleroy here is giving us some idea on that. Marvellous moustache still in place. Any idea, by the way, what regiment that might be? Well done. You see people who actually got their eyeballs open. I used to use this picture all the time, and people really struggle. Go, well, he's got a Fusilier bomb. He might be a guardsman. No, look, RMF, Royal Munster Fusiliers. When you're looking at postcards in genealogical research, there's all kinds of really useful information. To the extent that somebody once handed me a postcard and said, I think this is my Uncle Fred, but I'm not sure. Could you identify the regiment? And I turned the card over, and it said, to Gladys, love, Fred. Look at what you've got, and actually there's all kinds of information there. But still, moustaches are telling us here, with a very high no side whisker visible here, that we've moved into the 20th century. And it's not just officers, other ranks as well. So this is pretty much, in the late 19th and early 20th century, the moustache is pretty much universal for military service. To the extent, in fact, that it is regulation at this time that an officer, at least, must at least attempt to grow a moustache. I'll come back to that when we're in the First World War. So who's this fellow then with the massive beard in a guardsman? I mean, look at that. His beard is going down as far as his bare skin is going up. So who do we think this might be? Yes, it is. You're barred now. Look, you're... Yes, because of the axe, this is a pioneer sergeant. And many people will tell you, oh yes, well, in the British Army, the only bearded soldier up until last March was the pioneer sergeant. And that is, in fact, the case. So the pioneer sergeant was a rank that was established during the 18th century. We think the beard becomes prevalent with pioneer sergeants during the Napoleonic period. And we don't really know why, but there are substantial myths that say, oh, well, a lot of pioneer sergeants transferred over from being blacksmiths, and blacksmiths tend to grow beards because it protects their faces from sparks. I'm not convinced. Getting spark in your beard, set your beard on fire, surely. I mean, a bit dodgy, but that is one of the reasons that is given for why the pioneer sergeant grows the beard. But it is actually the fact that during the 19th and 20th centuries, the only infantry soldier permitted to grow the beard is, in fact, the pioneer sergeant. There he is with his axe. I bring this in to say, not all soldiers in the British Army are completely beardless, because there are exemptions are made for soldiers in the British Indian Army. This, despite the fact that it looks very authentic, is actually our reenactment group that we put together in 2014. And they were all delightfully hirsute. In fact, they would start every event that we did by twisting up the moustaches and saying, mucha ap, you will see that our correspondent here in the centre is somewhat bereft because he didn't have a moustache at the time. Still haven't got one now, but there we are. So that, as I say, the exceptions are made for colonial troops or imperial troops who would, for virtue of cultural reasons, be allowed to grow full beards and moustaches. Now, this is a soldier of, well, who is this? Can we identify what regiment that soldier is in? Yeah, yes, all right, go on then. He's in the Royal Army Medical Corps, exactly so. What told you that? Yep, so you've got the cap badge and the collar dogs. Also, I'm trying not to stray too far away from my spot here, but I shall point out that on his arm you've got the Geneva Cross. It's not actually a brassard, it is the badge that's going onto his full dress uniform. So this is definitely a soldier of the Royal Army Medical Corps. Because of that, I deduce that tunic colour is blue, as is the fabulous Brodie cap. Now, that particular cap there, Broderick cap, the Broderick cap only stays in service for a single year. Detested by the army. Why? Feminine, possibly. That's exactly. I suspect our colleagues of the senior service might be a little bit dispossessed to hear you saying that their caps look feminine. But yes, it looks a bit sailory. The other thing is it's not very practical. No peak means you haven't got something keeping the sun out of your eyes when you're using your rifle. So that is a very easy thing to date photographs to as well. If we look at photographs in this period and you're wearing a Broderick cap, you know it's going to be 1901. Round about there. But there we are. And again, still at this period, the moustache massively prevalent for our soldiers. Now this, despite the fact that all these guys are in red coats, I'm deducing again that this is probably immediately pre-war. And you can see now that the fashion is starting to shift. We're about 50-50 split between moustaches and clean shaven. So as we go into the war, things are beginning to change. Officers, however, are still required by regulation to at least attempt to grow a moustache. In fact, that doesn't go out until 1916. Why does it go out? Because an officer was going home on leave and he wanted to be clean-shaven. That was his particular choice. He made the mistake of shaving his lip before he left France. So as he was actually, before he left the trenches, he'd shaved and he got bingoed by RMP and actually arrested for breaking the regulation. And that went forward to court-martial, not capital court-martial. We didn't shoot anybody for shaving their upper lip. But it did get to the JAG officer who said, why are we prosecuting this fellow? Shaved his lip, sir. We're in the middle of the biggest war this country's ever fought, and we're actually prosecuting war heroes for shaving. This is ridiculous. So that regulation then dropped off the books in 1916. Other things that may be able to be spotted on our rather hirsute soldiers here, that closed collar on the service dress indicates this is a very early version. I suspect that what's happening here is this is immediately pre-war, and that chap there has got the uniform out of the attic, which hasn't been worn since about 1901. As you can see on the far side, there are some easily dateable things. Other rank soldiers down here not wearing the moustaches. The officer definitely is still wearing. How do I know he's an officer? Open collar and tie. So First World War officers still displaying collar and tie. Obviously, not many soldiers are going to be carrying their ash plant. Fantastically useful for an officer to be able to go, you chaps, go over there. That sort of thing, again, will indicate our officer. The Sam Brown belt, obviously, as well. What dates that image to 1916 and after specifically? Brodie helmets, exactly. So they don't come in until 1916. So we're going back into armour in 1916. And a lot of people will say, that old First World War Brodie helmet's rubbish, isn't it? Like a soup plate, battle bowler rubbling around on top of your head. No, it's great. It's great for what it's designed for, which is to be a trench helmet. What's the most vulnerable bit of you if you're in a trench? Top of your noggin. Of course it is, because you're not going to get shot unless you come out of the trench or unless the enemy is standing right on the lip of the trench and firing down into it. You are going to get hit by shell bursts. So when an HE shell bursts and throws up a lot of material, it's going to come down onto the top of your head. If a shrapnel shell bursts over you, you're going to get rained down on with shrapnel balls. So having that big, wide profile is actually really useful because not only does it protect the top of your head, it might even protect your shoulders as well. The other thing to bear in mind at this time is we're doing this is essentially a big siege war. If you are detailed to go out on a trench raid, or you're going to creep out and try and get hold of a German soldier in a forward sap, having your ears open means you can actually hear things. The German in his big coal scuttle Stahlhelm is got a bit of a problem there because his ears are covered up. So it is actually a really good helmet for... that's a digression. It doesn't have much to do with moustaches, but I thought I'd mention it. Here we go. So this is our typical British soldiers in the middle period of the war. We can, again, identify quite a lot of things. Again, 50-50 split, moustaches and clean-shaven upper lips. So you can see the fashion is trending away from it. Other things I can tell you about these soldiers. Well, this guy is certainly something to do with horses. Probably he's artillery. What do we think is telling me that? He's got spurs on. Well, spotted man. He's also, from an infantry point of view, got his puttees on upside down. So infantry soldiers wear their puttees tied at the knee. You can see that chap over there, the corporal, has got his putty tied at his knee. Putty, by the way, Indian word means bandage. So it's just wrapped around your leg, and the purpose of it is to keep the stones out of your boot and support your calf while you're marching. They work incredibly well. Much better than the things that replace them. But as you rightly say, Mum, he has spurs and he has butterflies on this boot and he has the puttees tied down at the bottom. The other thing he has to identify him as Royal Artillery is the lanyard. Lanyard science is a bit esoteric. Not many people really understand that. And his equipment is the O3 bandolier, which corps troops and cavalry troops keep throughout the war. So lots of things that you can pick up. By the way, if you're wondering, obviously that chap over there is a corporal because of his 2 chevrons. Do we know what these chevrons down here on the sleeve are? Good conduct and long service stripes, exactly so. And each stripe is a number of years. So usually this is referred to by soldiers as the not getting caught badge. Move on. German soldiers of the First World War, fantastic. Look at those. Again, incredibly hairy. So beginning of the First World War, the regulation in the German army is beards, go for it, absolutely. Do we know what changes that? Because in 1916, that definitely does change down to much smaller beards. Gas masks. So when gas is first introduced, the British Army particularly are completely unprepared for it. It's initially a German weapon. It is an offshoot of their dyeing industry. Well, I mean clothes dyeing, not dye. Anyway, so their gas is being deployed against British soldiers. They are completely unprepared for it. So the initial the first gas mask is actually your sock, which doesn't work particularly well. But we have officers in the frontline area who have experience of chemistry, and they know that the gas is actually alkaline in nature, so it can be counteracted if you can get something acidic. So what we need to be able to soak our socks in a liquid that is rich in ammonia and in plentiful supply in the trenches. What liquid is rich? Yes, exactly. So when the gas alarm goes off, gas, 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 you've got a wee on your sock. What if you can't go? I can't go. Well, the army very thoughtfully provides you with a big bucket of somebody else's. So you dip your sock in the big bucket of somebody else's and bring it out. Not particularly effective. So quite quickly we get good gas provision. So by the end of 1915 we have the PH hood, which is the phenyl and hexamine hood, which is a big bag. No problem for a beard with that. But by the time we get into 1916 we are introducing things like small box respirators, which do actually have a seal around your face. And the Germans, they determine that the beards will break the seal and that potentially you could be gassed. I'm not sure if that's true, but I certainly wouldn't be arguing the toss and trying to find out with my actual lungs. So by 1916, most of these German beards have gone because of the advent of gas warfare. Moving into the late war period, you can see now late war period, there's the interesting thing with hair on here as well. Despite the fact that we have got no beards, no moustaches visible here. Early 20th century haircuts tend to be quite long on the top. There's an old army adage, certainly popular in the 1950s when my dad was in the army, saying, anything under the cap is mine, which means that you're going to have a very high and tight around here, but up here you're going to have something quite spectacular. And you will see plenty of pictures of First World War soldiers with no caps on, with hair kind of doing this, which is not going to be the case as we go forward into the 20s and the 30s. Our chap on the far side, by the way, wearing the 08 webbing equipment, first webbing equipment. Again, probably Foreign Service. We can tell from the khaki drill uniforms rather than the khaki drab uniforms, which are the ones over here. And he's got that fabulous Wolsey pattern helmet, which goes out in 1930. So again, you can date from the equipment and from the uniforms. Other things that might be of interest, the little badge over on that lower sleeve is not a good conduct badge or a long service badge. It's what's called a war service chevron. So actually that indicates specifically how many years that soldier has served during the First World War. Sorry? 18 months? No, that's 3 years. One stripe per year. And if the bottom one is a different colour, which is difficult to tell in a black and white photograph, it indicates he started his service in 1914. This, anyone know what that is? That one single stripe? Wound stripes, exactly so. So this indicates, again, you get metal ones or cloth ones. That indicates that this soldier was wounded in action, went out of the line, recovered, and then returned to active service. So you do now start seeing late war, a lot of this extra stuff starting to turn up. Div patches up on the shoulder, that kind of thing. This chap, by the way, is being very naughty because he is contravening one of the regulations that says you may not wear jewelry or may not display jewelry. You can see he's got his watch chain going from his button across into his pocket. You shouldn't really be doing that. But he is a sergeant, so he does need a watch, so it would probably be winked at. I did used to have a fantastic image of a lot of Australian soldiers who'd been presumably told off for wearing watch chains on their uniform, and it was a picture that they had taken in France in a photographic studio, and they draped themselves in loads of ship chain and a big a sign at the bottom saying, "We want our mums." So this is the 1930s, and you can see not a huge amount has changed now, but now very much high and tight on the hair, no moustaches or beards in evidence, lots of fruit salad on this soldier, open collar and tie. Still an NCO, however. So again, this is not really regulation. It should only be officers wearing open collar and tie, but senior warrant officers will also do this to show their elevated position. Interesting, though. Anyone in the Second World War famous for having fabulous moustaches? Yes, exactly. I mean, nothing to do with the army, obviously, but certainly the Brill Creamers are going to be really rather well developed as far as that goes. You can see that maintaining cleanliness is something that soldiers really do prize and that the army always pushes. So soldiers in the trenches or on active service in France or Germany in the 1940s are going to be maintaining that shaving regime. And one thing that allows that is the prevalence of the new safety razors. I've got a picture of that. I'll come to that in a moment. This is quite an interesting one. Again, now we see not a single moustache in evidence. This is certainly a bit later during the Second World War. These guys all wearing their battle dress. By the way, battle dress, this particular uniform, when is battle dress designed to be worn, do we think? It's pretty obvious, really. It's designed to be worn in battle. So specifically, that's what it's for. It's initially patterned on the most practical uniform or clothing that can be sought at the time, which is 1930 ski wear. So this is actually used for 1930 ski wear. If you really know what you're looking at, you can look at different styles. So if you look at the chap right on the extreme edge over here, the sergeant, you can see he's wearing what's called 37 pattern. That's the initial pattern of battle dress. You can see that because it's got a fly covering up the buttons. There are box pleats on the pockets. If you look at the chap right in the center with the open collar and tie, he's wearing the 1940 expansion set, which basically does away with all of that because they work out, well, if we don't put all the box pleats and the fly covers on, we can make a lot more blouses. So that's why we get rid of all of that. But you can see what's going on. The chap in the middle is the officer because he's had his collar and tie tailored open. Those battle dress are not designed to be worn like that. Why do they start wearing it like that? Well, because some very clean-shaven chaps have arrived from across the water. American soldiers wear really smart uniforms, and even their other rank soldiers wear collar and tie. Of course, the result of that is that all the local girls are going, must be an officer. So it's nothing to do with nylons or chocolate. It's all that they look like officers. So even the other rank soldiers look like officers. So British officers in a closed battle dress are going, hang on a minute! So they tend to actually get the regimental stitch to tailor their collar open so that they can say to all the girls, hello, I'm an officer, you know. Not everyone during the Second World War is going to be entirely clean-shaven. Look at these fantastic fellows. So this begins a tradition within Special Forces to wear quite impressive beards. Special Boat Service, Special Air Service, and the Chindits, there's Ord Wingate there, who was quite keen to say, don't be bothering about bloody shaving, we've got better things to do. Got to go and fight the enemy. So there is this tradition that has grown up. Now, why Special Forces soldiers insist on doing this, and they still insist on doing this to this day, is it's projection of manliness, possibly. Look how tough and butch we are. The fact that they're wearing their shamars there and almost into Arabic headwear and Bedouin headwear might mean that that's why they're adopting the beard. Nobody's really gone on record as to say why, but it is a tradition within special services that they will wear that. Now, of course, these guys, basically, those particular regiments are disbanded quite soon after the war and then secretly come back in again post. There's our safety razor. Again, we've moved from those fantastic open cutthroat razors to safety razors. I have had the opportunity to shave with one of these. It's terrifying. If you've ever actually tried to shave with one, you can feel this naked blade on your face. It was the closest shave I ever had, if you'll pardon the expression. It was also the most nervous one that I ever had. Into the 1950s. Look at these fresh-faced young fellows. All of them now completely devoid of whisker, because that is the way that the fashion is going. So again, military fashion, civilian fashion, constantly bounce backwards and forwards. Nobody now, particularly apart from bank managers, are going to be wearing moustaches, particularly, until we get back into the 1960s. When the late 1960s comes in, there's a huge fashion towards adopting Edwardian fashions. So when we look at hippies and we go now, long hair and big moustaches, that came out of a late 60s or late 1967 pattern of adopting that Edwardian fashion. There was a whole thing about Edwardian fashion. Adamant, if anyone remembers that. Edwardian chaps defrosted on the telly. But there we are. So the younger people tended towards this until you get to the 60s. And then, of course, big fashion trendsetters like the Beatles are wearing those large moustaches, and that's where it's all going to go. And that is going to trend into the 1970s and go back into the army. By the way, some of my colleagues have posted the question, could this be little Patrick? Not entirely sure. It's possible. But this is soldiers in Northern Ireland. And if you get into the early 1970s, you get this kind of thing. Fantastic. That used to be called a Zapata moustache. So that was very popular in the British Army in the early to mid-1970s, certainly in Special Forces. If we get to the 1980s, again, the army is tending towards the clean-shaven, not that much in the way of moustaches. And of course, now that ban on having beards has been lifted. And despite what I said earlier, where a lot of people have been grumbling about it, it is in fact something that's been with us for a very long time. Look at that, fantastic. And I was sent only this morning an image sent to me by my friend Richard, who is the curator of the Royal Irish Museum, London Irish Museum down in Camberwell, and he sent me this. And this splendid young man is Alfie, one of number 15 Lou's Company reservists, which was taken in 2023 before the ban lifted, and is now D Company London Irish Rifles. There he is. And you could say, by God, look at that. That's a fantastic piece of... I don't know what it does to the enemy, but it scares the hell out of me. So there we are, ladies and gentlemen, a very brief and somewhat sideways look at moustaches and beards in the British Army. Thank you very much.